Whoa. Huge news in the real estate world this morning. I got an email less than 2 hours ago from National Association of Realtors. A little background here. If you're not aware, there has been a lawsuit ongoing where some sellers got together, made a class action lawsuit, and basically said, hey, this huge organization that is the National Association of Realtors is acting as one group controlling an industry and breaking antitrust laws. And they can't do that. They can't force sellers to compensate in a certain way. They can't force buyers to behave in a certain way because they have too much of a hold over how this industry goes. They won the lawsuit, and they threw the industry sort of into upheaval. NAR and various different brokerages since then have been negotiating with them on a settlement, on trying to end future lawsuits. And today, NAR sent out an email that was some massive changes to the way that real estate is going to work moving forward if this is passed. So the first big change is going to be that, looking back, typically, for decades, sellers have offered in the multiple listing service buyer's agents compensation to co-broke with them. Hey, you bring your buyer, great. I will share this compensation with you, and therefore your buyer is not acquiring that cost, but they're paying for the whole situation, right? This is the way that the industry has been done, good, bad, or indifferent. That's just how it's been to date. The first rule change is there will be no offer of compensation in the MLS. It will no longer be allowed. So what does this mean? This means that buyers might have to pay their agents out of pocket. It's a fully on them cost. It means that maybe sellers will offer a seller credit and buyers can do what with that what they want. It means that there's probably going to be a lot more negotiating on the contract on an individual basis. Hey, this is what your house is worth, but this is what's happening to me as a buyer. I'll offer you this, but I'm going to need this help from you. It means that the buyer agents in general are going to be totally shaken up in the way that they do business. It means that listing agents are going to have to make a decision. Well, are we going to keep our commissions about where they've been anyway, or are we going to massively adjust down now that we're not sharing a compensation with the buyer side? It means that by default, there's going to be probably a lot more transparency and a lot more clarity around the compensation structure. I think the general public doesn't necessarily fully understand how compensation has happened in real estate to date. So you can no longer, as of July, if this passes, compensate buyer's agents in the MLS. Buyer's agents can still get compensated. It's just not happening on the multiple listing service. And sellers cannot be forced or allowed to put that out there as a blanket statement, right? That's the first big change. Next big change is that if you are a participating agent in a multiple listing service, you must have a written buyer agreement with your buyer to work with them. So if you're going to participate on the buy side, you need a listing agreement. We've always needed, you need a buyer agreement. We've always needed a listing agreement on the sell side. You have to know when it starts, you have to know when it ends. But the buyer's agents have been doing what they want to do, what works for them and their buyers. Now, the MLS and NAR are saying, nope, if you are working in our system and you are working with a buyer, you need a written agreement. This is probably because this huge change is going to create confusion around, well, how are you getting paid? Am I paying you? And obviously, if you have to have a written agreement, it's going to force you to go through those things instead of just like wandering down the path with a buyer for a while before the problem comes up of like, how's this going to work, guys? So forcing the buyer agreement says, hey, I need to talk to my buyer. We need to establish what this situation looks like and how I'm going to get paid if I help you and what that value is to you. Doesn't necessarily mean that the seller can't be a part of that. Doesn't mean it can't be negotiated. Doesn't mean it's necessarily coming out of pocket for the buyer. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be flat fee or percentage, but it means you're going to have a buyer agreement. You're going to talk about it and it's going to get signed if you want to participate in the MLS. Those are the two major changes. To my understanding, this is not finalized yet. The thing that was wild to me is that the implementation period is July. I think in any industry, a major change like this takes time. And for an industry like real estate with 1 million agents in this association, to make two major changes like this, that is a really fast timeline. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Some byproducts of this that people will have to think about, will have to look at, is how is this going to work with lending? Because if Compensating your agent to have representation now becomes a buyer cost. Are you able to roll that into financing? Typically, financing has been set up where that's coming out of the purchase price, not out of the buyer's cost. So it's rolled into the loan without the buyer even having to think about it. You paid this for a house, this much came out of it to pay your agent. Well, now if you're paying your agent, can that get rolled into the loan? Are we going to look at policies there? If you're paying your agent out of pocket, what kind of credit do you get for that? Does that go towards your contribution on the loan? So this is going to have to be ironed out, and I think it's going to take more than July to figure out exactly how that's going to work. Another big question would be, hey, if you sell a house in June, right, and your neighbor sells the exact same house in August when this change has come into effect, and in June, you offered compensation to the buyers, whatever you did, and you offered compensation to the list side, whatever you did, and now your neighbor's selling and the compensation has been maybe halved. um, by definition, should your house now be worth less because the purchase price before included that compensation and now it doesn't? So the value to the buyer is less because they may or may not have to deal with that difference. So sellers sort of think they're getting out of paying that, but the question is, if this falls down all at once in July or August, are we going to immediately see a change in real estate value? Are we going to immediately see that people are like, well, that price right there includes a compensation and this price right here does not. Therefore, this price should come down. And obviously there's going to be a question of how much do they come down, because the definition of antitrust is there's no fixed commissions. There's some ranges that people expect, but it's not like you can just flip the switch and be like, well, now homes should be worth 3% less. No, some agents work for $2,500. Some agents get a 2%, 3%, 4%, 5% commission. So it's not going to be a simple switch to say, well, this is how much value should come down if they do, because compensation is now no longer a part of that purchase price. In addition to that, and further complicating that, some sellers may, as a strategy, want to still compensate buyer's agents because they know those buyer's agents are helping in the process. They know those buyer agents are representing the buyers and sometimes protecting them from liability. They know there's a separation there. So they say, hey, this is a value to us. We still want to make it possible for these buyers to have agents. We will offer closing credits. So now you have a house on the block that didn't offer any closing credits that may or may not have gone towards compensation. And you have a house over here that did offer compensation. Then you have a house over here that offered no credits towards compensation or otherwise. Are these three different values, these homes? And how much do you have to dig in to really know, well, what should this house be listed? And all the factors we're looking at to adjust that price, because we're mixing up the system here, and it's not a small change. We're talking about some pretty big numbers, a large percentage of the sale price. Again, there's no such thing as a set commission, but the range typically is a pretty large percentage that you could be affecting in the sale, and how it is digested and who pays for it, and then what is the value of the actual home being sold. Uh, this is big stuff. This is a huge industry shakeup. I think it's going to cause a lot of changes in the way buyers seek out and value their agents. I think it's going to cause a lot of changes in the way that buyers' agents do business. It's probably going to drive a lot of people out of the business. And I think it's going to be a wake-up call for sellers that may not have really understood how much was going on behind the scenes to help their properties get sold. If you hire one agent that's working with 10 buyers in a town, and that's the only person your property is exposed to, and there's now no easy way to expose that property with value to hundreds of other agents and thousands of other buyers in the area, how much does that scenario change for you? How much, as a seller, do you lose value because it's not known what compensation is going to look like if somebody helps sell your house? Certainly not a simple problem. It's certainly not a simple solution, and I think it will take years to really see the full impact of this. But we certainly will see impact very closely if this passes and these implementations are forced in July. If you have questions about this, questions about buyer compensation and what that looks like with a buyer agent, reach out to me. If you have questions on the list side about like, well, how is this going to change how we list our homes? Should I or should I not offer anything to the other side? How would I do that? Reach out to me. This is certainly still in flux. The NAR's recommendations were vague at best when I read the email, but we've been thinking about and looking at this for a long time. Reach out. We'd love to chat.